All right. Welcome, everybody, to the first episode and the meeting of 2022 of the Firefighter Book Club. We're here with Randy Keirn. We're discussing his book, Crossfire, Taking the Heat Out of Conflict. I kind of cheated on this book for this one because it was like right up the alley of the book that I'm writing. So I was already reading it. And Randy was an easy phone call to like, hey, would you want to come on the book club? I already got your book done. Because I know that all of us are trying to read a book every month that gets pretty pushy already. So I kind of cheated and used a book that I already read once before, and now I just had to kind of bruise through it again. I got my Christmas present in for this year. Hopefully all of you got a book for Christmas this year. Nice. Tommy Dunn sent a box of books to me, and this will be on the Firefighter Book Club this year. Notes from the Fireground from Tommy Dunn from FDNY. We're going to do his in September to kind of align with the 9/11 thing, of course. And next month's book is one of the situational awareness books by Richard Gassaway. And I say one of them because I don't remember the title. He's got like 9 books or something, but it's one of his smaller ones. We wanted to do something that was a little easier to kind of digest and kind of talk about. So I was lucky enough to get Rich in his busy schedule to come on the book club and actually spare an hour for us. And that was probably hard enough already, but yeah, that's what we're doing next month, Richard Gassaway. So let's turn it over to Randy. Welcome to the book club, Randy.
Thank you.
Yeah. I know we met in Virginia at a fire conference out there and just kind of started talking about this stuff over dinner. And then that carried into another dinner the following night. And always just interesting to talk about employee management and conflict resolution and stuff like that. And yeah, glad to have you on.
Thanks. I'm honored, really. It's sometimes it still surprises me that, people want to hear from me.
So, well, I thought you were going to say you're surprised that firefighters know how to read. I totally know that too. But I loved reading your book. And like I said, this is the second time I've read it. I read it right after I met you. I don't know how many years ago that was, 5 or 6. Yeah. I read it then. And then once this started up, I knew I was going to squeeze it in there somewhere, but kind of came really quickly after we talked, like, let's do January. And here we are. So welcome to the new year. So let's start it off. Why did you actually write the book, or how did it come about?
So there's a lot. I mean, actually, the precursor goes way, way back. And it actually is addressed in the book in the beginning. I really was struggling as a new officer to manage conflict to the point that I probably was close to getting demoted. I did really well in the promotional process. I felt like I was a solid firefighter and EMT, and loved training. I was obsessed with it. I became an officer. I felt like I was doing everything I always wanted to do as an officer, and we trained every shift, and things were going well until I had a conflict, didn't manage it, and it just kind of blew up in my face. I didn't know what to do. I walked away from it, and he wasn't a mean person, but he kind of owned me after that. And my whole crew just kind of lost respect for me. And, where things were going great, they kind of went downhill quick. So Lily came into the chief's office with 3 chiefs sitting at a table in a single chair. It's not a good meeting to have. And they said, I got to find a way. And I did. That's what I spent like a 25-year journey on finding a way of managing performance and conflict. So fast forward not very long, officer development. Nobody wanted to do conflict. And I said, listen, I've worked on this because I sucked at it. And I said, I can share what I did. And then like twice a year, I was doing officer development because nobody else wanted to teach it. No one else had anything. And fast forward a few years, teaching officer development, Lily made a joke. I said, who's excited about being here? Out of a 40-hour week, having a couple hours on conflict, I really thought it was like, this is something you have to do, right? But all these hands went up, and I'm like, you're punking me, right? And I said, why is your hand up? And they said, we came to see you. This is what I need. And the next guy goes, I came this week to see you because this is what I need. And I just there was a need out there that wasn't being filled. So I literally made a flyer. I went to a local fire department, said, hey, can I use your training room? And I put the flyer and the room filled up. And it kind of shocked me that people really had a need and an interest in what I was teaching. And it just grew from there. So once I had a solid program in place, I actually recorded my program, had it transcribed, and then I took the content and made the book. And the purpose of the book specifically was just for the people taking the class. I wanted something for them to take home. I never actually thought about people actually buying the book just for the book's purpose. Actually, the book is really the program I teach. And it was really it was designed to be a takeaway for the program. And again, Amazon was the best distributor. They're fantastic for printing and delivery. And then people started buying it. It was interesting is I've gone to conferences outside the fire service and had somebody walk up to me and goes, I read your book, which is really weird. I didn't think people would ever buy it in the fire service, let alone actually people outside the fire service actually buy it too, which is really strange to me. But that's kind of the path of, I never planned on writing a book. It just kind of became an adjunct to the program I was teaching. That makes sense?
Well, and we all know the conflict resolution. It's not just the fire service that's dealing with that. And that's why you're hearing that even outside the fire service, people are buying your book. You actually do some training for some private companies as well, right? In that same type of thing?
Yeah, I was really fortunate because I started really, after that, I actually started pursuing conflict training more serious. I got a bunch of certifications behind my name regarding conflict. And through a friend, someone recommended me, and I am getting hired by Harley Davidson, actually. So I spent a number of years at Harley Davidson, started just teaching conflict. It turned out I ended up doing a whole series of leadership training for all the leaders at Harley over 3.5 years. It was a great opportunity. So, yeah, I went from teaching no other than technical fire service training. I was the training chief. Then suddenly I got into the whole leadership thing and traveled around the country and stuff. So I did it for my own self. Yeah, it's actually, I had the opportunity to go international a few times. So it's pretty bizarre that I'm still humbled and excited and honored that people find value in it.
Did they just pay you with a motorcycle? Like how did Harley just?
I could have bought plenty of motorcycles. They were very generous. So.
So you were challenged as a new officer, and I think that anybody that and Virginia fire officers, their week-long program, like you said, is fantastic. There's a lot of people that come in just to sit in it from outside of Virginia to kind of see how that goes. And you've done some stuff down in Florida, but you being challenged as a new officer was a catalyst to this, right? And amazingly enough, in the fire service, I think that we don't even get pushback as probably a lot of other places because as firefighters, we just want to do a good job and we want to be good employees. So I think sometimes it just throws us completely off our game where it's like, hey, me and you need to talk about something. Oh, no, I don't have a problem. You have a problem. And they push back one time and you don't know what to do, right? Yeah. So that really was the catalyst. And you talk about in here, like, you decided you're going to have a talk with the guy that did have that pushback. And I'm going to talk to him after he does the engine check. And I'm going to talk to him after lunch and after dinner. And that really became, well, how do you actually deal with managing that? Because I think a lot of officers, they just want to do it like right before they get off shift and go, well, then I don't have to worry about it. They're going to go home and I don't have to deal with it anymore, right?
Yeah. I think by nature, we're either fighters or flighters, right? By nature, we get in people's face, we yell at them, or we passively don't want to engage. And I think by nature, we are one or the other. Okay. It might be different at home versus work, but let's talk about work right now. I think by nature, we're one of those two. And unfortunately, it's a fight or flight response. We're not thinking clearly. We're in a fight or flight mode, which is not healthy to have good conflict. So I think either approach is not good. Like, I'm a flighter, I was. And what happens when you don't deal with the problem? It just gets bigger. But fighters have an issue too, because they become part of the problem by fighting or you're yelling or getting in people's face and not handling it well either. So you just got to start with where you're at. I didn't know what to say and I kept putting it off, and it was a while before I ever actually had any conversation with him about that. And, but I said, I didn't have a conversation with him, but did he have a conversation? Yeah, with everybody in the department. And
Right.
here I went as one of the most respected, and just kind of perspective. And it's not to, toot my horn, just give you perspective. The State Fire College in Florida has 25 classes at the time. I took them all, and then I'm getting multiple college degrees. I mean, I really went all in to prepare myself in any way I could to do a good job. So I was the most qualified person to have that position. Yet I sucked at it from a leadership perspective. Technically, great. I mean, give me a hazmat, give me structure fire. I went to medic school also, became a paramedic and RN and all that stuff. I mean, so I had the medical down, I had the fire down, I had the training down, but dealing with people issues, I was horrible. And none of my classes prepared me for that.
Right.
And my life was, mom said, don't get involved. I didn't. That doesn't work when you're the guy in charge, It just doesn't. So I don't know if I actually got a little sidetracked. I don't know if I answered your question fully because I just been too far removed.
No, well, and like you said, so a lot of times we just avoid it. We always talk about passive aggressive. Sometimes I think I'm aggressively passive. I will try to figure out a way to make it all work without getting everybody spun up. I remember I had a firefighter that would have a problem bringing his uniform shirt. And I worked at the downtown station where uniform shirts are pretty normal, common stuff. There was always something going on. There's always something that you needed to do for the chief. So I'm at headquarters, and this individual would purposely forget, to bring his uniform shirt. So I'd have a talk with him and talk about how important it is and pride. And I do all that stuff. You think hey, I'm just going to get to that level and work through the process. And I just wasn't getting through to them after 5 or 6 shifts where it always became a problem. We're borrowing somebody's shirt out of their locker and removing a name tag. And I'm like, look, I'm not playing this game anymore. So later on that day, we're going to In-N-Out to get lunch. And on the way there, they're on the headset. They're talking about, I'm going to get a double animal fries and all. They're going off about what they're going to eat. And this guy can eat, of course, like a firefighter can. And we get to In-N-Out and we get off the rig and we're going up to order food. And I was like, hey, where's your uniform shirt? And he's like, oh, come on, Cap. I don't have it with me. And I'm like, well, I guess you're eating leftovers. That's when I actually got him to understand, look, I'm not playing this game with you anymore. And it's affecting your double right now, but it's just, sometimes you just, hey, you want to play the game, I'll play the game, but I'll play the game to where you don't want to play it anymore. That's for sure. And it's not about writing you up. It's not about discipline. It's, hey, how can we work through this problem? Right.
Yeah. One thing you said, but it I think was a big shift for me. And I think it's important to learn is you were trying to own the problem. He owns the problem. So you should have said, you should bring the issue to him and ask him what he's going to do to solve it. And then follow up with what's going to happen if you don't solve it. Right. There's a consequence out there that is there. And again, I don't, it's normal that we tell the guy to do, put a shirt on, but you're not getting through. And they have to change their own behavior. So I want them to own it. So I don't tell anything. I ask. Obviously, tell the problem. In the Crossfire model, it goes through that. But it's identify the conflict. But then I listen to them, hear them out, and then the objective is to solve this. But then really, I want to get to them to the solution phrase. What are you going to do to solve this? And then the one of the special sauces I have is what's going to happen if you don't. Because there's got to be an escalation. More importantly, we want to talk about the success you're going to have if you have it. And what I find is that most people verbalize what they're going to do, they're more likely to do it. Right. You tell them what to do that's proper, and they'll acknowledge you. But if they say what actions they're going to take to fix it, it actually, I believe, increases their performance because now they own it. One of the concepts, I don't think I talk about this in my book, but I think is really critical is motivation. And a lot of the times we're trying to improve performance by motivating people externally. That's a hard sell. It's external pressure, motivation from within. That's why I want to have them understand. one of the things I did love you said that you try to get him into the pride. I believe you said a few things and not only the rules of pride and everything else, why you should be wearing it. And I think the motivation, trying to get him buy-in, why it's important is critical. But then at some point he has to he has to own that or be part of that motivation. And if you found his currency, which was good, food. But,
Right.
what is his motivation? And it may not be the same as ours, but find his motivation and then get him to say what he's going to do to fix it. And what's going to happen if he doesn't? I mean, I think that's also critical. I call it this, like I said, I call it the special sauce because I had a guy get in trouble and went through the normal process, and then he got in trouble for the same thing again. And, we escalate some things escalate pretty fast. So, one's a letter. Next time you're looking at time off. He was looking at time off. And he was really upset. I'm like, how did you not know this? So from then on, I always pull out the book and say, listen, you told me you're to be successful, great, and I hope that happens. If you aren't, this is what's going to happen next. I found the repeat occurrences really minimized when they knew the consequences. And now I know from human behavior, consequences drive all human behavior, right? It's so, it kind of jumped into my spiel of what I've learned. But, I think, I want to acknowledge you for trying to motivate them first, trying to work with them. Yeah, but at some point, I definitely would try to get them to own it. But at some point, there's got to be the consequences. It's drives behavior.
Like you said, that motivation, right? It's always that classic oral interview question to a upcoming company officer, like, how do you motivate an unmotivated individual? And they're like, well, I'll just be motivated. And I'm like, it doesn't work that easy. Like, well, I'm going to push him and I'm going to like find out what he likes. And it's like, well, it's a little bit tougher than that sometimes to like try to figure out what really drives everybody. And we all know, hey, giving them a raise, like, oh yeah, I'll be motivated when I get a raise. It's like, yeah, that only lasts for so long. You got to figure out what that internal motivation is, right? Yeah.
Research consistently shows it's not a top 5 motivator. The only time money is an issue is if it's really out of whack with what's normal, then it becomes motivator. But it's just statistically shows not top 5.
Yeah,
year after year.
I remember we had a new chief officer coming in, and we were struggling financially at the department. And one of those things I always talk about is low morale leads to low morals. So when the department's out of a morale low, you see some stuff go out of whack real easy. But the fire chief is in his office. It's like probably 7 p.m. at this point, and this is at the downtown station at headquarters. So the chiefs are in the same station as us. And we go out and we go on a run, and I come back and I notice that he's still there at 7 p.m. And so I go in there and offer him, hey, we're having spaghetti if you want to have dinner with us. And he's like, no, I'm going home soon. And over the course of that evening, I see him there. Like, we go on a couple of runs and he's still there. So finally I go, hey, chief, dinner's ready if you want to have dinner. No, I'm okay. And so I said, well, I just want to let you know, I appreciate that you're still here this late at night, knowing that the financial problems that we're having, that you're still here this evening. And that really inspires me. And he says, well, Jesse, he goes, to tell you the truth, you really inspired me because I was getting ready to go home and clock out at 5. And I saw you out back with your Proby pulling hose at 5 o'clock.
Nice.
And he says, so I was inspired by that. So I get this whole, smiley face going on. And I get on the computer and I type up this email that basically says our mission statement. Why are we here? It's like the whole Jerry Maguire mission statement. And just like Jerry Maguire, I should have thought about it before I set the send button, because I called it my Jerry Maguire moment, And what inspires us, what drives us, and I do this whole email. So the next day I go off shift, and about 9:30 that morning, the texts start rolling in on my phone with all these Jerry Maguire quotes, right? The human head weighs 8 pounds and all this fun stuff. And I'm like, I'm totally regretting it.
Yeah.
And then the next day, C shift comes on. It starts all over again. Only dogs and, humans could smell fear and all this fun stuff. So I finally get a text from one of our guys that says, I'll be inspired when we get a raise. Or no, he sends me, show me the money, right? The Jerry Maguire, show me the money. And I go, yeah, I know, Jerry Maguire, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, no, really, I'll be inspired when I get a raise. Show me the money. And I'm like, you don't get it, dude. You'll never get it. you know, it's sad, but
Couple things, couple things you said, but I think are powerful. Again, we're talking about conflict, but we're also, we're talking about people. And you triggered a thought I wanted to share. You acknowledge your chief for staying there, and he acknowledged you. One of the things that really surprised me when I first went to Harley, we started out with the team leads, and these guys are, I love one of my first meetings there. It's like, well, who do you know that lives their brand, who tattoos their brand on their arm? I said, the fire department, and but one of the things that really surprised me was something I learned too, is I was doing conflict training with new team leads, and we were doing role play and different things. And when I saw somebody do a really good job, I really pulled them aside and said it. And these are big, burly, bearded, leather, tattooed, Second Amendment stickers on their lunch boxes. They actually had people in the back of the room for our safety when we first got there because no, seriously, because the negotiations were very hostile. And I remember this one guy, I said, can I talk to you? I said, he's like a big burly dude. And I said, can I talk to you back here for a minute? And he goes, what do you're going to talk to me here? And we had a group of round people that we're doing role play with. And I looked at him, I said, man, you are fantastic as a leader. The friggin' guy just started bawling. Wow. People need to hear that. So you're talking about motivating people. We take it for granted. Here's this guy who's a big, burly, tough guy. He's a leader, and he just started crying. So I learned to bring people at the back of the room, face their back to the room, and multiple men that fit that character cried. These people do not hear enough that they're doing a good job. So, you want to motivate somebody, getting to know somebody, actually, I would say yes, because they have to trust you. They have to trust and respect are critical things of relationship before they're ever going to want to, follow you, So acknowledging people when they do a job well is critical. I mean, it really is. And especially when you had a conflict, you have a plan in place, acknowledge the person for fixing the problem. It's it works.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's difficult to manage conflict unless there's a leadership component there.
Oh, absolutely.
And I always talk about the stuff that you do out on the street it affects you in the firehouse, and the stuff you do in the firehouse affects you on the street. It's all about how you actually manage it all throughout the day. I know plenty of great fire officers that can run a 3-alarm fire, no problem, but they can't deal with some small little bullshit thing going on in the fire station, and vice versa. It goes hand in hand,
And speaking to the people that are afraid to deal with it, like I was, it's not so bad. I mean, get in there and have a conversation. I created the process to give you a plan, but have that conversation, because the reality is it's gonna escalate and it's gonna be worse. It's going to be harder to deal with if you don't tackle it early on. The quicker you can deal with it, the better off you're going to be. And, I told myself just to fake it till I make it. And I decided what I needed to say, how I needed to act. And, eventually I became that person. So it literally used to make me sick when I had to deal with conflict. I used to own all of them. People do something stupid, and I'd be thinking my 2 days off were never my 2 days off. I was always thinking about them, and I went from avoiding it to actually being very. I would do whatever I can to not get them in trouble, right? Even though they got in trouble, I would try to minimize it, make it better. Again, that was my own insecurity, and finally I got to the point where I realized I wasn't helping them; I was enabling them. They own it. And here's the other thing: you're helping a lot of people when they're struggling and having problems. There's usually other things going on in their life. They don't need to add on problems at work in addition to marital problems, financial problems, whatever. So I actually think you're actually doing them a disservice if you don't. So get started. That's all I have to say is you're fearful of taking action, get started.
Well, and it seems like, the ones that we don't want to take action on are those ones that are the problem children, right? Or the 20% or whatever. But the hardest part about it is if you don't deal with those individuals, then the ones that actually do a good job, and then you go and talk to them, they're like, you let that guy get away with murder.
Yeah. Yep.
And you never talk to him, but you're going to jam me up right now for showing up late or whatever it is. So yeah, you have to, and some of our hardest people to deal with, the funny thing is once you actually shut that person down, you're golden. The guy that does do a little bit of the pushback. We had the one that was early, he's getting ready to retire, and it doesn't matter what you say to him. He's on his way out. And he introduces himself that morning, and you're like, hey, Rod, how's it going? He's like, he would tell you exactly how many weeks, minutes, days he has left, and that's his intro every single day that you see him. And if you're the company officer, that sentence ends with, unless I have a bad day, and you could be the one that provides it, right? Well, you're in for that kind of stuff, but you shut those people down. And we had a captain that was trying to manage Rod one day, and he basically goes into the whole oh, I'm going to write you up. And Rod looks at this captain and goes, are you prepared for that? Do you know how to do that? Or, and he was just so taken back by it because Rod's been written up before. Rod's had employee disciplinary stuff before. He's gone through all that. Does Rod give a shit? No, he doesn't care. So you can't manage him by going, well, I'm going to write you up, because Rod's past that already. Rod's got to have that, like you said, that internal motivation, what makes him click. Whether it's, hey, man, I just want to get you through the next however many weeks, days, right, like your currency that you're talking about. That's his currency. We're here to just get through that together,
Again, you prompted something that thought, difficult people. Obviously, his difficult was because of the path he was on near the end and all that. But a lot of difficult people actually is because they have crap going on in their lives. I think one thing I really came to appreciate, we had a guy that was real difficult. And I was complaining to my brother at lunch. He's a chief officer. He's retired now, but he goes, man, if only someone knew how to deal with conflict and was in a leadership role, cuss at my brother and then come back and deal with it. And I did. I decided I've got to, this has been going on for years. You know how it is. But one thing I really grew to appreciate from the interactions, it was nasty at first, I'll be honest, it was nasty. But one thing I really grew to appreciate is all the excuses he threw out of why things were bad. He had a lot of crap going on in his life, and it really made me appreciate a lot of difficult people are difficult at work, but they're difficult also because they have a lot of crap going on in their life. I'm not saying that they're not a part of it, because I believe they are, but it just gave me a perspective to have a little more empathy towards them when I have a conversation with them. They are struggling at home. They're struggling off. They're struggling at work. They're struggling all the time. I don't make an excuse for their behavior. I'm still going to deal with it, but it just gave me more empathy to understand. And I don't know. It was an insight. It took me a while to figure that out, but it was an insight I had from dealing with difficult people. They're difficult because they're struggling. And I think if again, you've got to build up trust. You got to have a good conversation with people, and you have empathy towards people that, his dog died. He was getting taken back to court the third time, and all this other things that were happening. First of all, negative things happen to all of us.
Right.
One, I think some things are out of our control. Some of these things were in his control, or he contributed to. But I also think he dwelled on them worse than us, than the average person. So, give me empathy. That's all. Difficult people are challenging often because they have a lot of crap going on in their life. The other reason is sometimes it works, right? We used to have a captain that he tried to have a conversation with somebody, and they would say something, he'd blow up, he'd leave the room and never come back. And it used to be, everybody knew it. So they would be difficult on purpose or say something on purpose, literally to get him to leave, and they would never get in trouble because he would lose his cool. And it was funny, but it's sad at the same time that they knew his hot button. He didn't know his hot button, but they could push it at will, and he would storm out of the room cussing and never come back. So again, there's other reasons why people have behaviors, but the difficult person often has crap going on in their life, and again, provided a better understanding for me to how to deal with them. And then again, more empathy. But again, you have to deal with it. You have to step up.
Yeah. Well, and that's another one that I always talk about. You were able to go to your brother, who was the fire chief at another fire department close to you, and I always tell everybody, like, look, you want to have another company officer or chief officer, whether in your department and one outside of your department, that you can discuss this stuff with. And I always had one outside the department that I could talk to that doesn't know the players, doesn't know the game, doesn't know the culture, and can have that different perspective than I have. Like, hey, have you thought about it this way? You got to have those people that you, and I always tell new officers, like, look, that's the best thing is network, find somebody that you can trust, discuss that stuff with, and bounce the ideas off of, for sure.
You gave me a memory. I came home and my brother was at my house waiting for me. And he just started small talk. Hey, how's it going? What are you doing? All this other stuff. And I just thought this was weird. And then it laid into what happened at work. Holy crap. He was dealing with an issue, a pretty bad issue at work. And the recommendations he was getting were actually, to me, were wrong from some of the other officers. That he was the chief. And some of these officers were recommendations. I'm like, oh, no, things he was doing really, what they were recommending were way off. Yeah. And he didn't feel comfortable with it. So again, he's talked it out. And yeah, I agree. It's very valuable to be able to have this conversation with others.
All right, Randy, you wrote a book. Let's hear the good stuff right now.
Yeah. Hey, it was nice with my brother. I'm usually going to my brother. And so it was nice to have I felt pretty, I'm the younger brother, so I felt pretty good for him to come to me.
Well, that was the weird thing is one of the guys that I had always done that with for years, he promoted to battalion chief. And after a while, I would call him and I'd be like, hey, this is what I'm working on. This is what I'm dealing with. And after we would work through my problem, he'd go, yeah, well, this is what I got going on. He'd give me like some chief officer level problem. And I just stopped calling him. I'm like, dude, I'm not going to call you anymore. You always got bigger problems than I got. And it was the worst thing I ever did because like I finally called him after a while. And he goes, man, we haven't talked in a long time. And I told him that. I said, I just stopped calling because you're always going to trump me with the problems you got going on. He goes, don't stop calling. He goes, I can even lessen them or whatever. But yeah, I kind of got into that world. Like, I'm not going to bother you with my problems because you got bigger problems, but you got to have somebody to bounce those ideas off of. You also brought up the hot button thing, right? Which you talked about in the book, know what your hot buttons are. And at the same time, you can also display those to the crew. Like I have a couple of pet peeves as a company officer, and it's part of that is those expectations talks. Like, hey, this is some of the stuff that if you want to spin me up, this is the stuff that I don't like. But your hot buttons go into the ABCs. Let's talk about the ABCs of conflict for you.
Well, first of all, a lot of people really do not know what their hot buttons are. So hot buttons are your trigger. It's an emotional trigger that is usually a behavior somebody else does. So somebody else says or does something that charges an emotional trigger in you. So again, a lot of people really don't know what their emotional triggers are. So my training will really try to focus on that for a few minutes. There's an assessment I do that helps define it at work. There's a list of hot buttons, and we actually identify what your hot buttons are through a series of questions. So hot button is that emotional trigger. There's one way I kind of reverse engineer it. Again, think about what really pisses you off, right? Think about the people that piss you off and think through what is it they're doing that really upsets you. And what you find out if you focus on it for a few minutes and think it through, what is the value or belief system that you have that is absolutely so important that they are encroaching on, they're stepping on, they're disrespecting, right? So, excuse me. So lying is one for me. And again, so when I think about like someone that doesn't tell me the truth or is deceitful, it charges an emotional trigger in me. I mean, immediately. And then understanding why it's an emotional trigger, like I know integrity is a belief system I have that's absolute. if I had to pick a value that I think is most important for people to have, is integrity. Okay. That's not to say, and again, that's my value, my belief system, which creates that anybody is dishonest or anybody lies to me, I literally get an emotional trigger. So first of all, being aware of your emotional trigger, your hot button, is awareness is really where you should start at, because you'll be more prepared to not let people push it. Okay. Because there's going to be some situations you're going to get in and people push your hot button. Once you start to feel that hot button, the tension, that trigger, I mean, you know it happens. It's a fight or flight response. The reaction is automatic. You know, you're going to react. The response is optional. So I'm going to say that again. Your reaction is automated. Your response is optional. So in that moment, this all happens in less than like a second, right? It's not willpower, it's won't power. Stop yourself from taking an action. And it takes practice. It really just takes practice. I mean, people that get triggered all the time, they say they can't help themselves. It's like working out. I mean, once you start controlling that, it gets easier and easier. Okay. Know your hot button. Learn to prevent it from taking actions that you're gonna regret later, right? And then if you really reflect, decide on what you do that cools your hot buttons. So one of the things we explore in the training is, what have you done in the past that has actually helped, right? Writing it out. I mean, you said you wrote that out, but you sent it. So writing it out and has just the opposite. I know that wasn't a negative, but I do that all the time. When I'm mad at somebody, I write out a letter. I'll have a friend of mine read it. Every time she says, let's send it tomorrow. I never send it tomorrow, but it gets the emotion out on paper. So we know from research that, taking a time out, just taking a break, removing yourself from a situation, in the moment, taking a few breaths, calming yourself down. One of the techniques that I learned from a conflict specialist, and she's also a martial arts, she teaches centering. And it's just about being centered. And so physically plant your feet in the ground, make yourself tall, center yourself, take a few breaths. Okay. Be aware of it. Take some breaths. Being centered are a few of the things that really can help you in the moments when the hot button is triggered. Again, there's a lot more. There's delayed responding. And it's funny, you notice it's A, B, C, D, E. Another one, this is based on the research, which I didn't like at first. It's expressing emotion. And again, being a guy, right? Like, I'm going to express my emotion, but it's actually not it's not a soft skill. It's actually saying, like, I'm angry, I'm pissed, saying how you feel. The research on this was phenomenal. It's called affective labeling. And they took groups of people that were deathly afraid of spiders. In the first group, they didn't say anything. They said, get as close as you can. The second group, they said, just talk. And the third group was told to actually talk about what you're feeling. I'm stressed, I'm stressed out, and whatever. And they not only measured the distance to the spider, they also measured respirations and perspiration. And the groups that actually did affective labeling were calmer and got closer to the spider, than the other groups. Some actually got so close they could actually touch it. So a simple technique of expressing how you feel, you have to own it. I'm angry, I'm frustrated. Now, you can't say you're pissing me off, because it's not owning it. That actually is going to escalate the situation. But in that moment, just expressing your emotions again, I didn't believe, I wasn't sure I believed in it, but I don't teach anything I don't believe in. So I actually did it with another chief officer that was troubled about something. And I said, I'm angry and I'm frustrated. And it literally opened the door for a really good conversation. And I was angry. I was pissed because I felt I was being blamed for something that was out of my control. And it led to a good conversation and took care of the conflict. But if I reacted by, you're pissing me off, or use some different words, not only would it escalate conflict, it would have escalated my own emotional charge too. So expression emotion, I think, is a really powerful one most people don't know about. That really works well. Most of the other ones, delayed responding, breathing, stuff like that, people know about. But reflect on what works for you. There's no one that works best. And it's something you just have to practice. So if someone does get the best of you with a hot button, learn how to manage it. When you have that sensation come on, do something that's going to prevent you from saying or do something you regret.
Yeah. Well, I think they even talk about that in the career resource management model with the conflict, like Todd Bishop's assertive stance. He always talks about state the problem as an owned emotion, right?
Yep.
It's like I feel or I see, I think, instead of the you statement versus the I statement stuff, right? If you are pissing me off, even though it's your emotion, you're still saying you, right? And that's going to create a response, right? One of their hot buttons. So once you go through the ABCs in there, another one you talk about is just the team dynamics, because to get that respect and to continue to know your crew and everything else, you got to go through the team dynamics all the way from the forming all the way to the norming and performing, right? So how does that affect the conflict portion based on what portion of the team dynamics you're in?
Well, the reason I included that in the book and in my training was because nobody told me it was going to happen. My first month was phenomenal. I get things started. I'd go in the office. I'd create a really great training plan for the afternoon, and we'd go out and do some training, and things were going fantastic. I just, it was finally, after all those years, I got to start implementing things that I really believed in. And then when I got caught off guard with the conflict, asking somebody to do somebody, and they said, go do it yourself. I stood there dumbfounded, not knowing what to say, walked away, and it kind of just fell apart from there. But it's, I totally lost my train of thought. I was going down one path and I switched gears for a second because of my story. Help me out. Where were we at?
We were talking about the storming, performing, norming, all that fun stuff. But
I got into my story and I got stuck on my story. So when that happened, I literally felt like someone punched me in the face. I was so caught off guard when he completely disrespected me. I mean, in front of somebody else too. And then when I saw that team dynamics, there's, again, you form and then you storm. The second phase is storm. I wish somebody would have known I would have been facing conflict before it happened. So it's kind of a motivation for learning this before you become an officer. And also realizing when you are an officer, if you change a personnel on your team, you have reforming. Your team is now in a forming stage again. May not be there long, but there is going to be a change. One person can change the element of how the team, and then you want to get back to your norm. So the other thing to learn is what can you do in the forming stage, and what can you do in the norming stage, and what can you do, storming and norming and then performing stages. What can you do as a leader in those different evolution of the team? So I usually get into a few minutes of during the forming stage. You're a new officer, you change shifts, you get a new crew. What's something you can do? And what if, this almost everybody tells me how most officers are pretty standard in that, well, I lay out my expectations. And I don't disagree with that, but I'd rather you do some other things first. And to me, I truly believe you're there to serve them, not the other way around. What are their expectations of you? Now, going back to team dynamics, it's built on trust and respect. And, leadership is all about relationships. So what are you doing to create the trust and respect that they want to follow you? And when you're not there and it's your day off, they still follow through with what's right. It's easy to control out of fear with the big stick, right? I can write you up. I can make you do things that you don't want to do, go clean toilets. But more importantly, what do they want to do? Because that's how we are. I love the team reputation concept. It's an element in my book too. But it's how are we going to be? It's bringing everybody together. So in the forming stage, find out their expectations of you. I do believe having expectations. They should know what is important to you as the leader. In the storming phase, really got to deal with it. There's some other things you can do proactively. I talk about in the book at the end. I'm not sure if you're going to get to that, but you can discuss how to manage a conflict before a conflict happens, and then you can do that with the team. Like, we're going to have conflicts. How are we going to handle them? And have the team discuss it beforehand. And you actually can create some ground rules. We did that at Harley. We created team contracts. So it's not an SOP. It's not a policy. It's none of that stuff. It's the team will agree on how they're going to be, and a lot of this comes back to trust. And there's not in my book, but the psychological safety. So what psychological safety is a fancy word for team trust. And you've got to create that early on in the forming stages and the storming stages. You need that. You won't get the norming, and you definitely won't get the performing if you really don't have that trust or team psychological safety. Psychological safety is you feel comfortable speaking up, asking questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions or speaking up when things aren't right, you don't have psychological safety. Your team will never be high performance. There's a great research out of Google on all this about psychological safety. It has to be done. It won't work. So again, that's the team dynamics and some things you can do to expedite your going into norming performing. Make sense?
Yes, you're making me do more research on some other stuff. Thanks.
Psychological safety. There's two topics. I think there's two topics that relate to performance, which is what we're talking about, that I do not see in the fire service that to me should be. One is psychological safety. Amy, I gotta think of her last name, but that work, psychological safety is foundation. You cannot have a successful team. It doesn't matter the size of the group, the pedigree of the group, right? It doesn't matter any of that. Without psychological safety, you're going to fail. And she actually discovered it by accident. She was assessing hospital staff, and she wanted to verify the error rate of successful teams versus non-successful teams. And she thought the data was wrong because successful team had the highest error rates, which didn't make any sense. So they sent in an observer to come to find out they had the highest reported errors. The other teams were not reporting them. The best teams actually had the highest error rate because they acknowledged their errors and they learned from them. Psychological safety is all about a learning environment.
Wow.
So there's one thing.
Now.
there's one more thing I want to tell you that I think is important that fire service hasn't gotten. The ABCs of safety. It's performance. There's the safety. The oil industry has done extensive work on changing behaviors and for safety. Extensive. And they came down with the basic models, antecedent, and this actually is in my book, antecedent behavior and the consequences. And again, consequences drive all human behavior. In our personal lives, our fears drive our focus usually, and then some pleasure, and then but consequences drive all of our actions. So understanding that and changing human behavior and performance to me is really interesting. Surprising me, it's not more integrated into the fire service. It's a really good concept, simple to read. I've got a good book on it if you want it. But a little side note, because we're talking about changing behaviors, we're talking about people. Again, leadership's about relationships and understanding people and how to get them to want to change is critical.
Well, and I kind of throw that out there. It's like, if you're talking about changing the culture, you're doing it one person at a time, because the culture is made up of the people, and that's what you're trying to do. So it's all about relationships.
It's the ABC model of behavioral modification, and it's driven by the safety industry. And they spent millions of dollars on it to figure this out. It's good stuff.
We never even got to Cross at all.
Well, I talked about the concept early on, and do we have a couple minutes for it?
Yeah.
So, I create, I'm not a big fan of creating an acronym and then creating a process. I had the process in place for years before I created the acronym. And then it just came to me one night. Then I created a model from it. But, it's just to simply identify the conflict. Don't overcomplicate it. People know when they screwed up. You're rude to Mrs. Smith. Hey, you backed the truck up without a backer. Don't overcomplicate it. Simply state what happened. And then listen. Some people do not want to, I don't even want to hear from you. You screwed up. You're in trouble, blah, blah, blah. Hear from them. Listen to them. Listening, to me, by far the number one leadership skill everybody should work on, period. You're going to learn things in the process. It actually creates, they release chemicals when they are listened to. So again, they feel better when they're heard. Again, all this leads to in changing in their performance. They're more likely to do it if you actually listen to them and didn't let them do most of the talking. Hear them out. Okay. And it really understands like their motivation, where they're coming from. Oh, you used to back the truck up all the time. Or Mrs. Smith, she calls us 10 times a day. She's a pain in the butt. Understand really what's going on, because you're trying to, the end goal is not the write-up. I actually don't like write-ups. The other day, I said, listen, I do not want to write this person up. It's going to cause more damage than change the performance. As long as, again, I sometimes stick my neck out and say, I'm not writing this. I did it the other day. I'm not writing this person up. I said, what's the consequences of writing this person up? And, I can't get to the situation, but it would have had a negative impact. Everybody would have found out about it. It would have created a bigger storm than it was. It was a minor thing.
Right.
So instead, I coached the person. He completely receptive. He's actually improved his performance, and no one knows about it.
Right.
So I believe in doing the least thing possible that's going to guarantee me 100% success. Now, do I always get it right? No, but that's what I strive for. What is the least thing I could possibly do from a negative aspect, a write-up aspect, versus the outcome I'm seeking? So back to the cross. Identify the conflict, hear them out. You're going to improve your leadership. They're going to be more likely to listen to you, build trust. Then the objective. Okay, for Mrs. Smith, you got to treat Mrs. Smith nicely. You know that. What are we going to do next time? Don't overcomplicate it. You're backing the truck up without a spotter. We can't back the truck up without a spotter. And then ask them what they're going to do to solve this problem. So I want to hear, and this is, what are specific behaviors? I don't want to hear what they're not going to do. I don't want to hear they're not going to do it again. I want to hear what behaviors you're going to do next time. And I say behaviors because I want a specific plan that they're clear and I'm clear what actions they're going to take to make the behaviors, the outcome better. So I want to hear that they're going to have a nice tone of voice. They're going to introduce themselves to Mrs. Smith. They're going to control their emotions. I want to hear the behaviors that I can see and hear that they're going to actually take actions. Plus, when they describe what actions they're actually going to take, it's easy for them to know what they have to do to be successful. And again, I believe most people do coaching don't get to that level of finding out because this is all behavior driven. So what behaviors are you going to do to solve this problem? And the same thing with the backing. Next time I back, I will have a backer. They're going to, follow the procedures. I want them to say it. I want them to own it. When they own it, they're much more likely to have success. Yeah. And then scribe is simply document it. If you document it on a napkin, they're more likely to live through it. But so I say, listen, I'm going to document on this. We have a plan in place. I believe you're going to be successful. But I'm also going to tell you, if you're not successful, this is what's going to happen. And again, I don't have any problem pulling out the book and going through it. I never write up anybody before I have a conversation with them. I think it's completely inappropriate. You need to find out and hear them out, because you've already biased and you already have your write-up ready to go before they meet with them. So bring them in, hear them out. And I say, listen, this is the plan. I'm going to write this up. I'll give you the opportunity to come back, read it, make sure I was accurate with my, what I heard and our agreement, and then you can sign it. But again, with that, there will be consequences if they don't live up to it. So they own the plan, they develop the plan, I just capture it. So what do I write? I wrote what the conflict is, what they said about the conflict, the objective, what we were trying to accomplish, what they said they would do to accomplish it, and then the consequences, they don't live up to it.
Yeah. So it becomes coming out of their mouth instead of yours. And
Yep.
yeah, my dad used to do that to me all the time. It's the worst discipline ever. So how are we going to fix this? And what are you going to do?
There you go. Yeah. How are you going to fix this?
Yeah.
Again, your dad knew my model that took me years to figure out. But it's the nice thing is too, being a person that didn't want to, I wanted to avoid conflict. One sentence of what the problem was, then shut up. Listen to them.
Yeah.
One sentence of what success looks like, right? We expect when you go on Mrs. Smith, you're going to have the highest quality, customer satisfaction, right? So one sentence here, listen, one sentence here, and then say, what are you going to do to fix this? So there's very minimal you need to do. It was probably done out of, my need at the time, not being comfortable dealing with conflict. But the reality is, from a coaching perspective, it was actually phenomenal. I'm certified as a coach now. We want to do less. We want to ask more questions and speak less about, this is a different opportunity here. But in conflict, we want to speak less. So ask questions and listen. That's really where our success is.
Yeah. Are we having conflict right now? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, sure. Well, I knew coming on here, I could hang out with you for hours, but you're on duty. You got to go back to work. And,
I got an hour left, so you're good.
Well, the last time we hung out, I think it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. We're like, we got to go to bed. So I knew I couldn't do that again with you, but I appreciate you being on and hanging out with me for a while. We'll wrap up. I'm going to turn it over to see if Phil has anything.
I love it.
He's a normal participant, it seems like. So, Phil, do you got anything for Randy at all?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go back to when you were talking about having empathy and trying to put everyone's going through struggles and all that. I was kind of curious where your guys' opinion on having empathy versus holding somebody accountable. I guess, yeah.
Phil, great question. Let me start with what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, kind of like you, I'm definitely a flighter. Like I try to tend to avoid conflict at all costs. And actually, I'm getting deeper in my walk with Christ, so I tend to want to be more empathetic and be soft in that way. But like, it's one of those where like you give people chance after chance after chance, and like, where do you give them ownership of the problem? Like we've already had meetings, we've already discussed what the problem is, we've already said, okay, what are you going to do about it? And then they still don't follow through. But at the same time, they're struggling in like their home life. It's like, well, okay, we've already addressed this, but I want to be empathetic to your problems you're having outside the fire department as well. So
yeah, my answer would be like yes and yes. Have empathy, but hold people accountable. And the reality is if they're struggling outside of work, be empathy, offer resources you can have. But, first of all, we have an obligation to the people we serve, right? We have to be ready. We have mentally, physically, everything. We have to be ready for each other, right? This is not a job that, if you burn a burger, you just make another one, right? This is not a job that you want mistakes on a serious call. So, he's got to be mentally, physically ready to go. And the reality is, I believe if you help him do a better job of performance at work, it will help him in his life. Because if things are spiraling out of control, the last thing he needs to do is start showing up late, doing bad performance, getting time off. That's the last thing he probably needs is, getting a shorter paycheck because he gets time off or doing something stupid. So I sometimes believe, hearing him out, hearing his problems, one's going to help them right there. It's their choice if they want to talk about it. And again, it's also their choice if they want to use any of the resources we have. I don't know your resources, but EAP, any clerical services, if they want it, clergy or anything else like that. I say clerical, sorry. I don't know what you have available. You could offer just offer any resources you have, but then also hold them accountable. So they have to be ready to do the job, you know?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Phil, I'm going to go back to another Jerry Maguire line. Help me help you. Right? Like I got to know what I can do to help you at work, but you still got to perform today. Right? So look, if you got something going on, you need 30 minutes to go deal with whatever, I'll help with that process and give you, but at the same time, this is still what needs to be done for whatever the shift or whatever. So it can be difficult. I had a guy come in late like a couple times, not like this person. He comes in late, and finally, like the third time, I just bring him up to the side. I'm like, Joey, what's going on, man? He's like, sorry, Cap. And I get very I want to make it simple, and I go, what's going on? He goes, well, my babysitter's been late a couple times, and that's made me late, and I'm like thinking simple, like, well, it's time to get a new babysitter, and he goes, well, I know, but it's my mom. And I'm like, all right, I don't know. I don't know, but you need to fix the problem somehow, right? It still comes down to whatever you got going on at home when you're here. And it's so much harder nowadays with everybody having cell phones and stuff like that. Like I joined the fire service where at 6 p.m. you were allowed to use the house phone, call your wife. It was like jail. You got 10 minutes to talk to her and then you're back to work. Man, it is not like that. We'll be on the middle of a structure fire and guys are answering their phone, dealing with their wife. It's like, really? Like we're in the middle of like fighting a fire right now and you're answering your phone. It's crazy. So it's tough, man.
Great, Phil. Hope that helped.
Yeah, it's any input's valuable. It's just a constant struggle between, like I said, holding people accountable versus trying to be empathetic to the situation. But no, I appreciate the help.
Yeah.
Is this a new situation where it's like he's been a solid employee for this whole time and just over these last couple of months he's having this issue, or?
No, actually, it's kind of been a on yearly thing, and the problem is we have rules in our. I come from a small volunteer department. We have rules where members have to make a certain number of calls a year. This person has not made that minimum in probably 6 years, but we've never held them accountable until now. So we're trying to
having a rule that's not followed is worse than not having a rule at all.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from.
First of all, I'd question the rule. And if the rule is really that important, then it needs to be enforced. I mean, there's got to be a standard, that needs to be determined first. Is this a rule we're going to follow or not? And you can't go it's once you let a 2-year-old run through the grocery store, you're never going to bring them back.
That's all just occurred to me during this thing. It's like it's amazing how many fire officers I've had have families and kids. It's like it's so much parallels though. It's like once you have kids, it's like adult babysitting in the fire station. You can handle conflict so much easier.
Some of the best, honestly, some of the best leadership training I developed, or the leadership skills I've developed was coaching baseball and soccer. It started with little peewees. Again, getting people to motivate them, trying to get them to accomplish tasks and be on time and all the things you do. It's no different. Can I throw in one more leadership bonus thing?
Yes.
I've asked a question. How would you say no, right? One of the things I modeled with Phil, and Phil, when you asked the question, I threw it back at you. And I say it's a leadership bonus because most leaders, we get in our own ego and we want to answer the question. The reality is you're closest to the problem and you really know how to answer the question. 90% of the time, you have the best answer. So by me answering the question before hearing from you would be ego. So for people listening, people ask you a question, most of the time they're not looking for an answer. They're looking for validation. Now, it was a combination. I think you, again, apologize if I'm wrong, but I think you were seeking some validation, but I also think you were looking for some information. A lot of people are just seeking a validation. Again, and it's natural, right? We're not sure if this is going to work or not, so we want to ask somebody else. We're not specifically looking for the answer. We're looking for an answer that matches what we think, So whenever, as a leader, whenever anybody ever asks you a question, ask them where they're at. What do they think? What's your options you've come up with so far? Throw it back at them. They're closest to the problem. And the reality is, I did learn from my coaching time, the things I suggest never work for them. And it sucked to figure that out. But man, once I did, I help people do all kinds of things now because it's their own ideas on how to fix them or own ideas of what they want to accomplish. And it's much more rewarding too, actually, now. I actually produce success. It's not by telling them what to do either.
Yeah, I think the other thing that you're dealing with, Phil, is it's hard for you to actually like fight a fire from the front lines.
Yeah.
You don't have somebody in the command post that supports the tactics, right? The overall strategy of that. And I think sometimes it's like, well, the chief officers, they're looking at a retention and a recruitment problem. It's already hard enough to get volunteers. And it's like, well, he came in for at least 4 calls this year, and that helped with our staffing a little bit. So we need that. But at the same time, is he an effective and productive team member getting on that fire engine when you're going to those emergency calls if he only comes in so many times? So if you don't have the backing from your boss to say, hey, we're just better off getting rid of him because they're not, like Randy's talking about, they're not enforcing the rule. Well, then what route you can go? The only thing that you can do at that point is really like having those talks with him. Hey, Joey, here's the thing, man. For you to actually be an effective member of the team, you got to go on calls more often. You got to commit, and that teamwork or emergency responsibilities or whatever, that sometimes that's the only thing that you can fall back to if you don't have your leadership backing you as far as like, hey, I'm going to manage the rule problem right now, but then they're going to overturn it. It's just going to put you in a bad spot.
Something else to consider is I would just have a sit down conversation, and it's like, why did you join the fire department? What is it that you love about the fire department? And what would it, what's his thoughts about not being part of it? Again, back to the motivation element. Does he really, is his heart into it to be there? And if you get him to buy in that he doesn't want to lose it and he wants to be a part of it, ask him, what do we need to do to make sure that, the conversation's not on the table to have him removed because he's not meeting the obligation. So consequences drive human behavior. So not only seeking pleasure, but also avoiding pain. So having him buy in on why he's there and what he gets out of it, and then also having him avoid the consequences of not living up to the behaviors that need to happen to be successful.
Yeah. Sometimes you're firing them by talking them into quitting.
Well, the reality is it may be time for him to quit. No one's had that conversation with him. And he thinks he's being loyal, showing up a couple times a year and staying as a member of the department, but maybe his heart's not into it anymore. Yeah. And again, find out if he really wants to be there. And if he really wants to be there, maybe you can get him to motivate to come more, or maybe he doesn't want to be there and it's time to, move on.
Yeah. Drill night's only going to get you so far. You got to, we're there to respond to the calls.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Phil, every time we talk, you're always in a tough spot, man. Hopefully we're helping you out.
Well, no, I appreciate it because I'm kind of in the, I'm only 10 years in the fire service, so I feel like I'm a rookie still, but then I'm like an officer over, the old salty guys that could be my dad, but then I'm also in charge of the 18-year-old probies. So it's just, and like I said, I'm the youngest of my household, my friends. Like I've always been a follower. I've never been a leader. So just, trying to find my leadership style is entertaining.
Nice.
I've told you before, my number or whatever, you can get a hold of me. So if you need something, let me know.
Yeah, I'd be happy to connect with you too if you want to talk.
Yeah, shoot me a thing and I'll get you Randy's info or whatever. But hopefully the book helped. Hopefully this talk helped. And like I said, if you need anything else.
Phil, does Phil have a copy of the book? Oh, I was going to send you one. Thank you.
Phil's actually, like I said, Phil's been on here pretty much
highlighted.
It's more of it's highlighted than not. So
Nice.
It's good stuff. Well, I took additional notes today because Randy gave me homework during this one. So then I got to look up, effective, tagging and all kinds of other stuff that I wrote down. So
Behavior
effective
modification.
labeling.
Affective labeling.
Yes. All right, guys. Well, thanks, Randy.
My
Hopefully we'll
pleasure.
see you soon. All right, buddy.
Take care.
Thanks, Phil.
thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.